you a landlord or property business who's wondering what you can do to get ready for the Renters' Rights Act that's coming this summer or autumn? But you want to focus on what's really important, the real risks, rather than all the noise. Yes? Well, you're in the right place. This video does exactly that. It's true that the Renters' Rights Act will overhaul the way in which we landlords, and I'm a landlord, run our businesses. And it's going to have significant implications for letting agents as well. But in this video, I step back from all the controversy, campaigning and clickbait headlines and provide you with lots of practical, straightforward tips to help you navigate the changes ahead. So I first break it down into 3 risk-based buckets. So they are big things that will change the way that we operate. Second, are things that don't fundamentally change the way that we operate. They just add to it, but they are still important. And then the third category is additional compliance that we'll have to do when we're told. We can have it in the back of our mind, but we shouldn't really waste too much energy worrying about it at the moment. And if you're an HMO landlord, I flag things for you as well. So once I go through that, I pull it together into 7 areas of risk and then share 7 concrete ways to reduce the risk. I do like my 7s. Before explaining on things that you should not do. And then as a bonus, I share something that you can start working on now. This is really going to help you get ready for the Renters' Rights Bill and to put it all into perspective so you can figure out what you actually need to do. I'm Suzanne Smith, and I worked as a lawyer in business for 25 years before becoming a landlord in 2019. And I spent a lot of my time as a solicitor helping the businesses where I worked to get ready for the implementation of new laws, most of which we weren't happy about, but we still had to comply with them anyway. And so I'm used to getting ready for new legislation and figuring out what's important and what's just noise. And then that way we can all spend our time doing things that address a genuine risk and will make an impact and be efficient and get our businesses ready. If you don't know me, I run the independentlandlord.com website and this YouTube channel. And I put my years of experience as a lawyer and now a self-managing landlord to good use by providing lots of free, straightforward content on how to succeed as a good landlord without all the politics. Right, let's get started. What's actually changing? Now, I've done a couple of videos on this, and if you want more detail, you can go and watch them. But taking a risk-based lens now, let's start with the first bucket, which is big new things that will change the way we operate. So what are they? Well, these are the things that may well be changing as early as the summer, although it's more likely in the autumn. And we're going to need to adapt to these straight away. And what I'm talking about is the new tenancy system, because on the commencement date, all existing tenancies will become periodic rolling tenancies. And so assured short-hold tenancies will go and they will all become assured tenancies that will be periodic. And so this is the case even if you've got a fixed term, you're in the middle of a fixed term contract with a tenant. And it will become all the more difficult for landlords to evict problematic tenants, as landlords won't be able to use Section 21, where we don't need a reason to evict. Instead, we'll need to have grounds. And this is going to cost a lot more and be more difficult to do. And I've done a video on what the abolition of Section 21 means. And the upshot is that tenant selection is going to be really important. It was always important anyway, but it's going to be even more important now. And to mitigate this risk, we're very lucky that we can have rent guarantee insurance. And I'll get onto this in a bit. So also, tenants will be able to leave when they like with 2 months' notice to expire at the end of the rent period. So it means it might even be a little bit more than 2 months. And we don't know, and I'm recording this in December, we don't know yet if landlords will be able to take any upfront rent. It's not clear. Also, it's going to be potentially more complicated to increase rent. And the rental discrimination rules mean you'll have to look at your selection criteria for new tenants to make sure they don't discriminate against families and those on benefits. And I'll explain more about that shortly. And finally, there's things like having to allow pets if it's reasonable. And that's another right for tenants that will start on day one. Okay, let's now look at the good practice things that most landlords are going to be doing already and where it just builds on what's there. And I'm not entirely sure whether it's going to add a huge amount. And what I'm talking about here is the Decent Home Standard and AWAB's law. We already have legislation such as the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act, and we must make sure that there aren't hazards in the property, and we have lots of obligations regarding repairs. And I'm not sure that these actually add too much, but let's see when they're published. But there's certainly going to be a lot more publicity about it. So this brings me on to the third bucket, which is additional compliance, as if we didn't have enough. So this is bureaucracy that we'll have to understand, put systems in place and comply with. And what I'm referring to are the landlord database and the membership of the landlord ombudsman. Now, I don't think that these are game changers in terms of how we'll operate. I don't think we have to particularly worry about it now, and we'll find out what we have to do in due course. It's going out to consultation, so who knows what's going to happen and what the details are going to be. So for now, I think we can park it and make a mental note that we'll have to make sure your systems are in place once it comes into force. Anyway, I'm assuming that you're not watching this after it comes into effect, of course. And if it has come into force, then have a look, because I'm bound to have done a video on what it all means. But bear in mind that you're likely to have to upload your gas safety certificate and EICR and any license. So make sure they're up to date. They should be anyway. And regulatory bodies will be able to easily see who's a landlord, and you'll get a fine if you don't register, and maybe even a rent repayment order. And for the landlord ombudsman, we'll have to think about how to handle complaints, particularly if you're a landlord with a lot of properties. But that's more admin rather than something more fundamental. Right, let's go on to the 7 increased risks for landlords. And so these are the areas where I think we should put our attention. The first one is the impact of the new assured tenancy system. So that's, it's going to be an indefinite tenancy. It'll be up to the tenant when they want to leave. There's going to be no minimum term. We won't be able to use Section 21 to evict tenants. It will probably lead to longer void. The revenue may be less predictable. Maybe not for single-let landlords who have long-term tenants, but certainly it will be more predictable for flats and HMOs. And for HMOs, there'll be more turnover of tenants at a property. It will be harder to plan, and there will be no renewals. So there won't be that annual cycle of being able to increase the rent in a way that is accepted with issuing a new fixed term tenancy, even though you don't actually have to do that. And there's going to be no fixed term tenancies for student landlords. So there'll be no matching with the academic year. And if you're a student landlord, no doubt you're already thinking about that. Number 2, it's going to be more difficult to manage and remove problematic tenants. It's going to cost more. The lawyers will do really well out of it. It'll take longer. We'll need to provide evidence. And I have a whole video on what's going to happen when Section 21 is abolished. And then there's the whole issue of rent arrears, because it's going to take longer to evict for rent arrears. So another one is tenant selection. We have to be really careful with tenant selection, but we can't discriminate on the grounds of them having a child or being on benefits. It's going to be more complex to increase rent without the renewal reason that you have every year, and you're going to be subject to probably more tenant appeals if they think that it's above market rent. There's also the risk of having to accept pets. There will also be more focus on damp and mold and repairs when AWAB's law comes out. I mean, landlords have a duty already to get to the bottom of why damp and mold is appearing. So that's not new, but there's just going to be requirements on us to respond in a certain amount of time. We don't yet know the details on that. There will also be more scrutiny on landlords as a result of the database. It's going to be easy for any regulatory authority to have a check-up on us and to see if everything's on order. And that's on top of the increase in fines and rent repayment orders. Now we've come to the really important part, 7 ways to reduce the risks. And the first one is tenant selection. It's really important to have a robust tenant selection process, to reference tenants, to ask them lots of questions. You want to weed out those applicants who are just looking for a cheap Airbnb. You want to look for tenants with a good long-term reason to be in the area. And don't skip on referencing, and don't just rely on one landlord, but try and talk to the previous landlord, particularly if they've moved around a bit. And do take out credit referencing as well. It's worth it. You can see lots of things that are flagged if you have a proper professional reference. I do also have a look on Google, on Facebook, and LinkedIn. It's surprising how much useful information's on there. So the next one is build a good relationship with tenants. So this is customer relations. Now, it's easier if you self-manage, but you can still show you're engaged if you use agents by going on inspections. And I think that landlords should do that once a year, just to make sure that the property's okay, that the tenants are doing what they should do, that the letting agents have been doing a proper job. And so when you're dealing with the tenants, be businesslike but friendly. That's the golden rule. How would you want to be treated, or your children or your relations be treated, if you or they were renters? So the next way to mitigate risk is revenue and legal insurance. And we're very lucky as landlords because we can protect our revenue by taking out rent guarantee insurance. And we can also take out legal insurance for rent arrears. This is something that I've only just started doing recently. And here's a link to an option for rent guarantee insurance. The next one is rent levels. Are your rents at market? Do you actually know what the market rent is for your area? Are you above? Are you below? You might want to have a look at gently increasing it towards the market if it is below market. And in the future, you're going to need to have evidence if you're challenged when you put up the rent once the Renters' Rights Act comes into force. And so we all need to start thinking about how to find out what market rent is. And this brings me to talking about managing rent arrears effectively and actively. Don't just leave it. It rarely goes away by itself. As I said, it's going to take longer and cost more to evict tenants who are in rent arrears. And prevention really is better than cure. So have a process, and you can read how to manage rent arrears here, theindependentlandlord.com/rent-arrears. The next one is sort out your compliance. Do it now before the act comes into force. And, things like, are you registered with the ICO? Because they might be checking to see who's a landlord and to see who's registered. And do you have a data protection notice as well? And I have all of these resources on this page here, theindependentlandlord.com/ICO. And make sure you've been declaring all your income as a landlord, because HMRC will be looking at these records on the landlord database. The next one is to inspect properties yourself. And you can do this even if you have an agent. Just go together with the agent and do this before the Renters' Rights Bill comes in, before it becomes an act, and go around with a critical eye and think, are they of a decent standard? Are there any hazards? Is anything dangerous? Are there any repairs that need doing? And have there been any complaints about damp and mold? Investigate it. You can even get sensors these days to see the cause and get to the bottom of whether it's something structural or whether it's something that the tenants are doing or not doing. They might need educating, and you can sit down with them and explain to them the causes of condensation. So this is something that is really important, that we're all going to have to make sure that we manage even more actively than we do now. And here's a link to a post with lots of advice on damp and mold that's on my website. Now we're getting into what you shouldn't do. Right, the first thing is rent to rent does increase risk. It will be a lot riskier to operate using a rent to rent model in the future once the Renters' Rights Bill comes into force. So why is this? Well, if you're what's called a superior landlord and you lease a property to a rent-to-renter, well, you're going to be liable for their breaches. And there's a big long list of new offences as well that you're going to be liable for. And also, unless you're letting to a supported living provider, you won't know you can get the property back at the end of the lease. And so you would then inherit the tenants at the end of the lease and take them on as a superior landlord. Another thing you shouldn't do is ignore the rules and hope it will go away. There are so many fines, and it's going to be a lot riskier when it comes to enforcement action. And thirdly, sham licenses. I mean, there's lots of talk about how to get round to the Act, all the different things that people can do. Now, take my advice from 25 years working in business. Comply with the spirit and intent of the law and don't try and wriggle around it, because the authorities will have a way of coming after you if you don't. You can see what's happened with taxation, with many schemes that landlords have done. And also I've seen it with competition law and lots of other things. So this is the bonus tip. It might seem quite obvious, but it's actually really important. And that's compliance. Keep records of everything. Get organized. Audit all your paperwork. Do you have everything? And if you use agents, ask them to give you copies of all of the compliance documents so that you have them. You never know when you might need them, and they might get taken over, and then the new letting agents might not be any good. They might lose the documents. But if you take ownership and have the documents yourself, you will reduce the risk. And particularly inspection reports. Make sure you have detailed inspection reports and that you follow up on the list of actions afterwards, and you record conversations with tenants, particularly when they're making complaints or when you're giving them advice about what they should or shouldn't be doing, particularly when it relates to damp and mold. And keep it all in an electronic folder, and you collect it as you go, and then it's not difficult. And so you can put in screenshots of WhatsApp messages, and on some tenant platforms or landlord platforms, they'll save it all for you there. So, and I have a checklist for you to sort this all out. You can find it at theindependentlandlord.com/landlord-compliance. That brings me to the end of this training session on how to prepare for the Renters' Rights Bill. If you've got this far and you found it helpful, it would be really great if you could subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future videos, or at least give it a thumbs up. And please do share it with your landlord buddies. It will really help this new channel and bring this free, straightforward, practical information for landlords and property businesses to the attention of everyone. And I'm not charging for this, and I know a lot of companies are charging for it, but you can get it all here without the politics, all for free. And if you want to keep up to date with what's going on, you can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter at theindependentlandlord.com/subscribe. You can also take a look at my other videos in this free training course series, Renters' Rights Bill Exchange. I also do videos on other topics that matter to landlords. See you soon.